After I came to Christ, I was exposed to a very woodenly, legalistic, literalistic interpretation of Scripture. I was taught that um, every word of the Bible was dictated by God to human agents who wrote it down exactly as God said it. And I was taught that every word of the Bible um, was literally true, um, not just theologically, but scientifically as well. And so, as a result of that, um, I spiritually found myself in a rather difficult place because um, my dad was a biological oceanographer with a degree. His PhD was in biochemistry. And uh, most of his friends, my mother also worked in the scientific field, in her case for the in the departments of anatomy and pharmacology um, in the School of Medicine. My dad taught at the main campus of Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and that's where his main research lab was. He also taught every summer. He taught and directed a course for graduate students and postdocs um, on marine ecology, and that was done at the Marine Biological Laboratories in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. So I grew up with this love for science. Um, and that it was never pushed upon me, or there was never any expectation that I would become a scientist or anything. But I always found science to be fascinating. Learning about the natural world uh, from way back. My parents also, I guess, one of their major hobbies, maybe their main hobby, was bird watching. And they got involved with the Maryland Ornithological Society. My dad eventually became president of it. And from the time I was a small child, we regularly went on birding trips. And some of them were overnight things where we camped out. Some of them were, a lot of them were very early morning out in the wild before dawn, listening to the birds. And a lot of those bird walks and trips were led by really top-notch ornithologists. I'm not sure exactly where they came from, but there were some really renowned people that led those trips, and so that was it was just a fascinating experience, being with people who before dawn could hear a little peep or chirp and tell you what it was, who could see a silhouette and knew instantly what kind of bird it was. So that was fun and interesting, and then in Woods Hole in the summers, where like I said, my dad was teaching this graduate course in marine ecology, um, and Woods Hole's a tiny little burg. It's really not even a separate town. It's a village within the town of Falmouth on Cape Cod. Um, and there's really nothing there except marine laboratories. And it's an epicenter for marine research. The Marine Biological Laboratory is there. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute is there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department of Fisheries has a great big facility there. And in the summer, uh, graduate students and professors and postdocs from all over the place who are interested in the marine sciences come there to do research, to teach summer classes, to spend time with each other and learn from one another. So it's a fascinating place to be. And they decided, all these professors, from all over the place, and their spouses decided to put together a summer school for their children. And so they rented a 4-room schoolhouse, which is still there. Got to see it not too long ago. 2 big classrooms downstairs, 2 more upstairs, great big wide wooden staircase going up to the upstairs rooms. And every summer, they would run 2 sessions. I guess they were like 6 weeks each, something like that. And they hired these amazing science teachers. And so it was one of the highlights, even before we got there each summer, to get the little catalog and to look through it and decide, I want to take ichthyology and geology this year, and so everything from geology to the study of fish to dissecting worms to learning about all the mammals that live on Cape Cod and trapping little mouse-like things and studying them, and all fascinating. The rest of the year we lived in Baltimore, and I was always tromping around through the woods, catching snakes and frogs and stuff like that, and invariably bringing them home. And there was an older boy who lived not too far from us who was planning to be a professional herpetologist, someone as a scientist who studies reptiles and amphibians. As far as I know, he did that. And he was a real nice young man, and saw my interest, helped me learn about snakes and salamanders and that sort of thing, helped me catch them, helped me not to be afraid of them, to know that, that bull snake is going to bite, but it's okay. It's not gonna hurt. And so in Baltimore, I had a whole room full of terrariums and such, filled with frogs and toads and snakes and that kind of thing. And I know I'm weird. One of my favorite hobbies was dissecting stuff. Of course, my parents were able to set me up with old microscopes and dissecting tables and such that weren't being used in their labs anymore. And so I would sit there for hours and, I know this sounds weird, but I would euthanize frogs, and then I would dissect them very, very carefully, and study the internal parts. So, that's the kind of background I came from. Well, then, I come to Christ, and I'm taught, no, all that stuff that you've been shown, that's all wrong. All of this, all that geology especially, that's all wrong. All of it popped into existence about 6,000 years ago, maybe 8, at the most 10. And I accepted that hook, line, and sinker, and studied six-day creationism, read all the Duane Gish and Henry Morris books and all the others that I could get my hands on. And became convinced that the Genesis account was a literal description, like a reporter would report had a reporter been there at the beginning of time. And I hung on to that religiously for quite a while, but it always bothered me. There were several things that bothered me. One thing that bothered me was that I saw so many younger people, high school age, who had been taught that literal six-day creation stuff, and then they went to college and they took intro to biology, and it blows all that right out of the water. And I've seen too many young people then completely reject their faith. They throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. That bothered me. Another thing that bothered me was, why would God create the world so that anybody with an open mind who is examining God's world would conclude, no matter what direction they're coming from, no matter what their scientific field of study is, if they just open-mindedly examine God's world, they would quite obviously come to the conclusion that it's millions of years old in a universe that is billions of years old. And they would come to the conclusion that life, biological life, carbon-based life, has slowly evolved. What I struggled with was, why would God pop it into existence 6,000 or 10,000 years ago, but make it look like it was much older than that and happened in a different way? And to me, I thought that makes God deceptive. It's like God's trying to fool people. And so that didn't make sense to me either. And so I really, really struggled with all of this. And I am so grateful that at last I found a number of the British authors like John Polkinghorne and N.T. Wright. Tom Wright was the Bishop of Durham, Anglican bishop, world-renowned theologian, and he has absolutely no problem whatsoever with evolutionary theory and the Bible. John Polkinghorne is also an Anglican priest, but before he was an Anglican priest, he was a renowned theoretical physicist, and he's written a lot of fascinating books about the congruency between Christianity and science. And I discovered that this whole six-day creation thing, it's not even an issue anywhere but in the United States. They don't worry about it in England. People naturally see that the two different creation stories, and there are two of them, and they are different, in the book of Genesis, are beautiful God-inspired parables that teach us much more than how kangaroos got here. It teaches, those stories teach us what it means to be human and what our relationship to God is, and our relationship to each other, and our responsibility to creation. The lessons are so much deeper. And what really concerns me is that there are groups like, I live in Cincinnati, and just across the river, the Ohio River, in Kentucky, is the creation museum, and then connected with it, they recently built this replica of Noah's Ark, um, which of course replica has never been in the water. It's both of these are big, extravagant, well funded, uh, convincing things, and the whole purpose of them is to convince people that um, the description in Genesis is a literal description of how life got here. And they go so far as to say that if you don't believe that, then you might as well throw away the whole Bible. And that's absurd. And that's my main objection, because I don't really care if you believe in that, God popped everything into existence 10,000 years ago, just kind of poof. Um, it, you know, I don't care if you believe that. The overwhelming evidence, not just the preponderance of evidence, but all of the evidence from dozens and dozens of different scientific disciplines have all concluded that life as we know it evolved slowly over a long period of time due to natural selection. So I'm grateful for people like John Polkinghorne and others, but the main one I think right now that I'm grateful for in this category is Francis Collins. Francis Collins directed he's a brilliant physician and scientist. He has PhD and MD both. He directed the Human Genome Project. His team was the first in the world to map the human genome, which is opening up amazing opportunities to prevent and treat hitherto untreatable diseases. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And after the Human Genome Project, he became director of the National Institute of Health, NIH. Most of us are familiar with Tony Fauci, who's been in the news. He's the world's leading expert on pandemics and communicable diseases. So with COVID-19, he's been in the forefront. There is no one on the planet that knows more about COVID-19 and how it spreads than Tony Fauci. Francis Collins is his boss, and the two of them, especially now during this pandemic, they communicate every day. They're also good friends. Their spouses are friends. Anyway, Francis Collins is he's one of the most loving, devoted, sincere evangelical Christians I've ever seen. The man radiates with the love of Jesus. There's no denying that. And he started a group called BioLogos, BIOLOGOS. And you can Google it and go to their website. And he's not directly involved. He's with its day-to-day operations. He's too busy. But it's a collection of scientists in various fields who are dedicated to showing that science and faith are not enemies. They are siblings. And as some of the old theologians said centuries ago, God's written two books, the Bible, which points us to Jesus, the primary revelation of who God is, and nature, which God created, and therefore, even though it's tainted by the fall, reflects who God is. Um, so I, I want to encourage you, I guess, to set aside some of the dogmatism and some of the uh, the dogmatism, and check out Biologos and read some books um, by all means. If you haven't, please read Francis Collins' book, The Language of God. Changed my life. Um, if you're scientifically minded, read John Polkinghorne's books. Read some stuff that N.T. Wright wrote. Read what C.S. Lewis wrote about evolution and life, and recognize that this fundamentalist insistence on a woodenly literalistic interpretation of the opening chapters of Genesis, this is something that's uniquely American, and it's modern. It was never looked at that way or accepted in that way historically by the church. Still isn't by most of the church. And go over to Biologos's website and read their articles. Tune in to their various broadcasts. They have a podcast, for instance, that they do regularly, and let's be open and teachable, and let go of some of our dogmatism, which is it's. I was going to say it's impossible to hang on to biblically. I guess impossible is too strong a word, but it's in my opinion, not viable. Oh, and while you're at it, go bird watching.